Hi everyone, my name is Shrees and welcome to Code with Shrees. Today we'll be going over how to write Rust Lambda functions using the CLI. We'll be using Cargo Lambda, which is the easiest way to build and deploy Lambda functions written in Rust. This is going to be great practice for using the CLI, and we're also going to be using the latest recommendations by AWS for developing Lambdas written in Rust. So without further ado, let's get to it. So our first step is to, of course, install Cargo Lambda. Because I'm using a Mac OS device, I'll be using Homebrew to do so. However, you can also install Cargo Lambda using Python as well as Windows. And the commands for this are shown on the screen. Okay, so let's install Cargo Lambda. Finally, we'll confirm that Cargo Lambda has been successfully installed by running Cargo Lambda version. Okay, so it looks like Cargo Lambda was successfully installed, so we can get on to now creating our Lambda using Cargo Lambda. But first, let me clear my screen. So the command we'll be using to create a new Lambda package is the following. This starts a new dialog with the first question being whether our Lambda is an HTTP Lambda or not. So in our case, our Lambda in this tutorial will not be an HTTP Lambda, so say no. The next question it asks you is, what is the event type that the Lambda function will be responding to? So in our case, we're just gonna take a regular JSON payload, so we're gonna leave this blank. However, there are many different options here for standard AWS events, and what Cargo Lambda will do is it will create, it will automatically generate the code needed to handle receiving these kinds of events. But in our case, we'll just be doing a custom event, so we'll just leave this blank. Okay, so our function has now been created, and it's in this directory called my function. If we open it up, it's just a standard Cargo Lambda project. You have your source folder, your main.rust file, git.ignore, cargo lock, and cargo toml. So let's take a second to just inspect the main.rust file that it generated for us. We'll see here that it's making use of the Lambda runtime. So this just helps us actually transform our standard Rust function into a function that can be used as a Lambda. Cargo Lambda also automatically generates a request and a response struct. So in this case, this Lambda will be expecting a request that has a command parameter that is mapped to a string value. And it will also return a response that returns the Lambda's request ID as a string, as well as a message that was created using this command value here. So we can see how this is implemented in the function here called function handler. It is an asynchronous function, so we have the async keyword at the beginning, and it takes an event that is a Lambda event that has the structure of our custom request object that we have up here. So this request is referring to this one right up here, as well as we'll be returning a custom response as a result, as well as an error if there are any. And here in the main function, we are just setting some basic log settings, as well as finally running the Lambda to handle requests using our function handler function. Okay, so now that we've explained how the main.rust file works, let's now go to building the package. So first thing we need to do is make sure that we're actually in the function directory. And if we do a list, we'll see that we're in the right directory because we have our source, our cargo, toml, and everything that is related to this Lambda function. I'll clear my screen once more to make some more space. Okay, so to build the Lambda function, we're going to be running the following command. Here I've added the release tag because it creates a smaller deployment package that is more likely to be able to work with Lambda. Okay, so the Lambda package was successfully built. We have a finished release here. Cargo Lambda makes it very easy for you to locally test your Lambdas, and this is how. We're gonna first run Cargo Lambda watch, which will set up the Lambda to watch for incoming requests and respond to it. Okay, so once we see this running target debug my function response, we can open up a new terminal to now invoke the Lambda locally. So the command we need to use to invoke the Lambda locally is the following. And you'll see it returns a response in the exact response format that was specified in the function. So we have the request ID as well as a message that uses our input, which was some command, as the message. So yeah, this is a really efficient and cost-effective way to test your Lambdas because you don't need to deploy to AWS and then inquire various costs. You can just do it all locally. So once we're satisfied with the way that this Lambda is running, we can finally deploy the Lambda as well. So this is the command we need to use to deploy the Lambda. One thing to note is that you should have your AWS CLI set up beforehand. So if you don't have the proper AWS permissions on your terminal, then this command will not work. Okay, so slight problem here. We actually need to be inside the directory for this to work as well. So let's just cd in right now. And then we'll run that command once more. So unlike in our previous tutorial, Cargo Lambda will automatically create a Lambda execution role for us with the basic permissions. However, if you're doing extra things like interacting with S3 or DynamoDB or any other service, you actually need to go into AWS and update the execution role to do that. So once the Lambda is successfully deployed, it will give us the ARN of the function, which can be used for any kind of apps we need. But in our case, we're just going to invoke the function in Lambda from the CLI using the following command. All right, so we received a status of 200 from AWS, so we know that our function was successfully executed, and we can now look at the response by just looking into that response.json file. But first, I'll press Q to exit this dialog. And we'll just use cat to look at the response we got. Also, the response that we got is pretty much the exact same as we got when we were testing locally. So that shows just how reliable it is to test these functions locally using Cargo Lambda. So if you do need to deploy this function using other methods such as CloudFormation or Terraform or something like that, you'll actually need to create a zip file. By default, Cargo Lambda does not create a zip file for you, but if you add the output format flag, it will create a zip file that you can then use in a template for CloudFormation or Terraform. To do that, we'll use the following command. And this will create a new zip file in our target directory. You'll see it's called bootstrap.zip. So this is the path that you would put into your template to deploy the Lambda using other tools like CloudFormation or other things like that. So that now concludes how to deploy Rust Lambda functions using the CLI.